What if you could witness the moment when Earth decided to reinvent itself so completely that even the air you breathe would become unrecognizable? 300 million years ago, our planet underwent a transformation so profound that it created the oxygen-rich atmosphere that now fills your lungs, while reshaping continents and birthing the first great forests that would one day become the coal beneath our feet. You're about to discover how a world of strange, primordial beauty gave birth to the Earth you know, and why this ancient revolution still echoes in every breath you take. What if silence could be loud enough to drown out everything that would ever exist? 4.5 billion years ago, Earth hung in space as a molten sphere of liquid rock, radiating heat into the cosmic void while spinning through a universe that had never heard the sound of wind, rain, or the rustle of a single leaf, because none of these things had yet learned how to exist. In the beginning, Earth spun through space as a molten jewel, glowing red-orange against the cosmic dark, like an ember fresh from some celestial forge. The young planet pulsed with primordial energy, its surface a churning ocean of liquid granite and basalt that rose and fell in slow, hypnotic waves. No solid ground existed anywhere, just endless expanses of molten rock that stretched from horizon to horizon, painted in shades of orange, red, and yellow that shifted like aurora across the planetary surface. No continents broke the surface of this primordial world. No mountains pierced the molten seas. No valleys carved their ancient stories into solid stone. The Earth was a world without geography, without landmarks, without any permanent features save the relentless convection currents that carried heat from the planet's interior to its glowing surface. This was geology in its purest form, planetary architecture being written and rewritten with every passing hour as the molten surface cooled, crystallized, and then melted again in the dance of planetary formation. The atmosphere that shrouded this infant world would have been utterly alien to any modern eye. It held no oxygen, no breath of life, no gentle blue sky scattered with water vapor and protective ozone. Instead, methane and ammonia drifted through a thick greenhouse haze that filtered the young sun's light into an eerie, perpetual twilight. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and other volcanic gases created a poisonous cocktail that would have been instantly lethal to any complex life form. Yet this toxic atmosphere served as Earth's first protective blanket, insulating the surface and helping to regulate the planet's temperature as it slowly cooled from its violent birth. Yet within this seemingly barren sphere, the building blocks of transformation were already stirring in ways too subtle for any observer to detect. The constant bombardment of asteroids and comets was delivering water and organic compounds from the outer solar system, while the planet's own volcanic outgassing was gradually changing the atmospheric composition. Chemical reactions were taking place in the interface between rock, water vapor, and atmosphere, simple molecular dances that would eventually learn to become the complex chemistry of life. Volcanic eruptions painted the sky with ash and steam on a scale that dwarfed anything the modern world has ever witnessed. These weren't isolated geological events, but planetary-scale processes that involved the entire surface in a continuous cycle of melting, eruption, and cooling. Steam rose from the molten surface like breath from a sleeping giant, while volcanic gases created spectacular displays of atmospheric chemistry that colored the sky in hues unknown to any modern sunset. Gradually, as eons passed and the cosmic bombardment subsided, the first solid crusts began forming like islands in a sea of fire. These patches of cooled rock provided the first stable platforms where more complex geological processes could begin: the formation of the first minerals, the accumulation of the first sediments, and eventually the construction of the first permanent landmasses that would become the foundation for continents. This was Earth's childhood, violent, beautiful, and pregnant with possibilities that would take billions of years to unfold. In the patient dance of geology and chemistry, cosmic forces and planetary processes, the stage was being set for the greatest story ever told: the emergence of life from lifelessness, complexity from chaos, and eventually the awakening of consciousness itself in a universe that had begun in perfect, profound silence. In Earth's ancient oceans, floating in waters that had never felt the touch of oxygen, Microscopic pioneers were about to unleash a transformation so profound that it would kill most life on the planet, while simultaneously creating the conditions that would make all future complexity possible. Something extraordinary began stirring in Earth's ancient oceans, microscopic architects that would forever change the nature of existence itself. These tiny organisms, no larger than specks of dust, possessed an innovation that would prove more revolutionary than any technology humans would ever invent. They had learned to eat sunlight, transforming the steady stream of solar energy into chemical fuel through a process so elegant it bordered on magic. Cyanobacteria, among the planet's first living innovations, discovered how to capture sunlight and transform it into energy through the alchemy of photosynthesis, using chlorophyll pigments that painted them blue-green in the filtered light of the ancient seas. These bacterial pioneers developed molecular machinery capable of splitting water molecules and harvesting their electrons. This biological solar power system enabled them to manufacture their own food from carbon dioxide and water, freeing them from dependence on the limited chemical energy sources that had sustained all previous life. The success of this innovation was spectacular. Cyanobacterial mats spread across the shallow seas like living carpets, forming layered structures called stromatolites that built reef-like formations in coastal waters around the globe. These bacterial cities became Earth's first major ecosystems, supporting diverse microbial communities while fundamentally altering the planet's surface chemistry through their metabolic activities. But their metabolic gift came with an unintended consequence that would prove catastrophic for most life forms of the time. Oxygen, produced as a waste product of their solar feast, began seeping into the atmosphere like a slow poison, creating the first global environmental crisis in Earth's history. This gas, which modern organisms depend upon for survival, was utterly toxic to the anaerobic life forms that had dominated Earth for its first 2 billion years. For millions of years, this reactive gas accumulated in Earth's oceans and atmosphere with the inevitability of a rising tide. Initially, the oxygen was absorbed by dissolved iron in seawater, creating a chemical reaction that precipitated iron oxides, rust, onto the ocean floor. This process painted the seafloor in brilliant reds and oranges, oxidizing iron in the oceans and creating the banded iron formations that still stripe ancient rocks today, like geological zebra stripes, recording this atmospheric transformation in stone. As the iron in the oceans became saturated with oxygen, the deadly gas began escaping into the atmosphere in ever-increasing concentrations. The sky itself began changing color as atmospheric chemistry shifted from the methane-dominated haze of early Earth to something approaching the oxygen-rich atmosphere that would eventually support complex life. Most anaerobic organisms, the planet's original inhabitants and the only life forms Earth had ever known, faced extinction on a global scale. These ancient microbes retreated to oxygen-free refuges in deep ocean sediments, underground environments, and other locations where the toxic new gas could not penetrate, or they perished entirely, their evolutionary lineages disappearing forever from the biological record. Yet this apparent catastrophe became evolution's greatest opportunity, demonstrating life's remarkable ability to transform crisis into innovation. Some organisms learned to harness oxygen's power instead of being destroyed by it, developing respiratory pathways that could extract far more energy from organic molecules than anaerobic metabolism had ever achieved. This aerobic respiration unlocked energy production so efficient it would fuel all complex life to come, providing the metabolic foundation for multicellular organisms, complex ecosystems, and eventually the energy-hungry process of consciousness itself. The Great Oxidation Event had transformed Earth from a world of simple, energy-limited organisms into a planet capable of supporting the energetic demands of complex life, proving that evolution's greatest advances sometimes emerge from its most devastating challenges. The depths of ancient seas held waters where sunlight filtered through billions of years of solitary existence, as life prepared to abandon its long tradition of independence and discover something that would change the nature of existence forever, the transformative power of living together. For nearly 2 billion years, Earth's oceans had been populated by microscopic loners, single-celled organisms that carried the entire burden of survival within their individual membranes. Each cell was a complete universe unto itself, manufacturing its own food, managing its own waste, defending against threats, and reproducing through simple division that created identical copies of the parent. This was life in its purest, most self-reliant form, where survival depended entirely on individual capability and resourcefulness. Yet in the depths of these ancient seas, life was learning its most important lesson, the revolutionary power of cooperation. Some bacterial cells began experimenting with proximity and mutual dependence in ways that had never been attempted before. Instead of viewing other organisms as competitors for limited resources or threats to be avoided, certain cells discovered that partnership could provide advantages that no individual could achieve alone. Single cells, having ruled Earth in isolation for billions of years, began experimenting with partnership and specialization that would transform the very definition of what it meant to be alive. These early collaborations started simply, perhaps one cell producing compounds that another could use, or two species sharing the same protective space while contributing different survival skills to their shared environment. The most revolutionary partnerships involve cells learning to live within others, creating the first cellular communities, where different partners contributed unique abilities to their mutual survival. One organism might excel at capturing energy from sunlight or chemical sources, while another possessed superior defensive mechanisms or waste management systems. Still others might specialize in reproduction, genetic repair, or environmental sensing, contributing specialized services to the cellular collective. These endosymbiotic relationships represented a fundamental shift in evolutionary strategy, from individual competition to collaborative advantage. Rather than each cell struggling to master every aspect of survival independently, specialized cells could focus their evolutionary development on specific functions while relying on partners to handle other essential life processes. This division of labor enabled far greater efficiency and sophistication than any single cell could achieve alone. Over millions of years, these partnerships became so intimate and essential that the participating organisms could no longer survive independently. What had begun as temporary cooperation evolved into permanent cellular alliances, where the partners gradually evolved into the complex eukaryotic cells that became the foundation for all plants, animals, and fungi that would ever exist. Within these collaborative cells, sophisticated internal organization emerged. Nuclei formed to organize genetic material in protective compartments, creating cellular libraries where DNA could be safely stored and efficiently accessed. Mitochondria, descended from ancient bacteria that had specialized in energy production, became cellular powerhouses that could extract far more energy from nutrients than simpler cells had ever achieved. Chloroplasts brought the revolutionary technology of photosynthesis into portable packages, enabling cells to carry their own solar energy systems wherever they traveled. These internalized photosynthetic partners freed eukaryotic cells from dependence on external energy sources, while providing the metabolic foundation for plant life that would eventually colonize the land. Through this architectural revolution, life discovered that cooperation could achieve what competition alone never could: the intricate cellular machinery necessary to build multicellular organisms of unprecedented complexity and sophistication. The age of cellular collaboration had begun, setting the stage for every complex life form that would ever grace the Earth, from the smallest fungus to the largest whale, from the tallest tree to the most intricate coral reef, all built upon the fundamental lesson that life's greatest achievements emerge not from individual struggle, but from the revolutionary power of working together. 540 million years ago, something extraordinary began stirring on the seafloor of ancient oceans, a biological renaissance so sudden and spectacular that it would forever change the definition of what it meant to be a living creature on Earth. For nearly 3 billion years, life had existed as an invisible kingdom of microscopic forms, bacteria, and simple cells that required magnification to observe and left few traces of their existence in the geological record. The oceans teemed with life, but it was life that operated on scales too small for any casual observer to detect, a hidden world of molecular machinery and cellular innovation that had been quietly perfecting the art of existence. Then, across a geological moment that lasted perhaps 25 million years, brief by Earth standards yet unimaginably long by human experience, the oceans suddenly exploded with biological creativity in one of evolution's most spectacular events. This wasn't a gradual emergence of complexity, but something far more dramatic. A creative explosion that seemed to violate everything scientists thought they understood about the measured pace of evolutionary change. After billions of years of microscopic simplicity, life unveiled an astonishing diversity of complex forms that seemed to materialize from evolutionary nowhere. Where once the seafloor had been populated only by bacterial mats and simple multicellular organisms, suddenly bizarre and wonderful creatures began appearing with anatomical innovations that had never existed before. The fossil record, previously sparse and difficult to interpret, became rich with the preserved remains of organisms so complex and varied, they challenged paleontologists' understanding of biological possibility. Creatures with shells, spines, and sophisticated sensory organs appeared across the seafloor like alien inventions, testing the boundaries of what biology could achieve. Some developed external skeletons that provided protection and structural support for larger body sizes. Others grew elaborate spines and defensive projections that deterred predators or helped with locomotion. Many evolved sensory systems of unprecedented sophistication, particularly visual organs that could detect light, movement, and environmental changes with remarkable precision. Eyes evolved independently dozens of times during this period, creating visual systems that range from simple light-detecting spots to compound cameras capable of tracking movement and recognizing shapes with extraordinary clarity. This explosion of visual innovation suggests that the Cambrian seas were becoming increasingly transparent, allowing light to penetrate deeper and making vision a valuable survival tool for the first time in Earth's history. The emergence of predation intensified the evolutionary arms race, driving innovations in armor, speed, and defensive strategies that created ecosystems of unprecedented complexity. For the first time in Earth's history, organisms had to worry about being eaten by other organisms, creating selection pressures that favored rapid locomotion, protective shells, camouflage, and defensive behaviors. This predator-prey dynamic accelerated evolutionary innovation, as survival required constant adaptation to new threats and opportunities. Trilobites scuttled across ancient seabeds with compound eyes that rivals modern engineering, their sophisticated visual systems containing thousands of individual lenses that could detect movement, judge distances, and track prey or predators with remarkable efficiency. These arthropod pioneers developed jointed legs for swift movement, segmented bodies for flexibility, and complex sensory organs that made them among the most successful animals of their time. Other creatures experimented with body plans so strange they challenge imagination. Five-eyed Opabinia, with its bizarre, grasping proboscis, the massive Anomalocaris with swimming fins along its sides, and the enigmatic Hallucigenia, with its rows of defensive spines. These organisms represent evolutionary experiments that pushed biological architecture in directions never seen before or since. This biological explosion established most of the fundamental animal architectures, still visible today, proving that evolution could create magnificent complexity from humble beginnings, while demonstrating that life's creativity, when unleashed under the right conditions, could transform an entire planet in the geological equivalent of an instant. 450 million years ago, along the edges of ancient coastlines where waves met barren stone, life was preparing to attempt something that would have seemed impossible to any observer, abandoning the protective embrace of water to venture into a world that had never known the touch of living things. Since the dawn of existence itself, every creature that had ever lived depended entirely on water as the medium of survival. Bacteria drifted through oceanic currents, complex cells floated through ancient seas, and even the most sophisticated animals remained forever aquatic, their entire evolutionary heritage tied to liquid environments that provided everything needed for life to flourish. The continents stretched as vast wastelands of naked rock and sterile sand, baked by unfiltered sunlight and scoured by winds that carried no hint of moisture or organic possibility. No soil softened these harsh surfaces, no vegetation provided shelter or sustenance, and no ecosystem existed to support any form of terrestrial existence. This was Earth's final frontier, a realm that seemed forever beyond the reach of biology. Yet along the transitional zones where ocean met land, where tidal pools created temporary bridges between aquatic safety and terrestrial challenge, evolutionary experimentation was beginning to test the boundaries of biological possibility. Some organisms were learning to survive brief exposures to air, developing tolerance for the shocking environmental extremes that existed beyond the protective buffer of water. The greatest migration in Earth's history began not with animals, but with humble plants that dared to leave their aquatic cradle for the harsh world above water. These botanical pioneers started as simple green algae that could endure low-tide conditions, gradually evolving the ability to survive longer periods of aerial exposure, while discovering that terrestrial environments offered unprecedented access to sunlight and atmospheric carbon dioxide. These early colonists faced seemingly impossible challenges that demanded revolutionary biological innovations. How could they obtain water without swimming through it? How could they maintain structural integrity without water's buoyant support? How could they reproduce without aquatic transport for their offspring? Each obstacle required solutions that no organism had ever developed during life's entire aquatic history. Through ingenious adaptations that emerged over millions of years, early land plants developed internal vascular systems to transport water and nutrients from underground sources to their aerial portions. These biological plumbing networks could move fluids upward against gravity through microscopic tubes, creating the first internal transportation systems in terrestrial organisms. Waxy protective coatings evolved to prevent fatal water loss, sealing plant surfaces with waterproof barriers while maintaining specialized pores that could regulate gas exchange. Root systems developed as dual-purpose organs for both anchoring plants firmly in soil and extracting moisture from underground reservoirs that remained hidden from surface view. Their extraordinary success transformed the terrestrial landscape from sterile rock formations into the first living carpets of green that would eventually expand into vast forest ecosystems. These pioneer plants created soil through their decomposition, modified local weather patterns through their water cycling, and established the biological foundation for terrestrial life. Arthropods followed these plant colonists, bringing oceanic food webs onto land as herbivorous insects discovered abundant new food sources among the spreading vegetation. Predatory arthropods pursued their prey into these terrestrial environments, while decomposer species began processing the plant debris that accumulated on land for the first time. Early fish developed increasingly muscular fins capable of brief terrestrial ventures, initially perhaps pursuing arthropod prey into shallow waters and eventually onto muddy shorelines. This colonization of land opened entirely new ecological possibilities and established the foundation for terrestrial ecosystems that would eventually support complex land-dwelling vertebrates, transforming Earth from a purely aquatic biosphere into a world where life could flourish both beneath and above the ancient boundaries of the sea. Something extraordinary was reaching toward the sky from Earth's newly conquered lands, living architecture that defied every assumption about how tall a plant could grow, creating the first vertical cities of green that would transform barren continents into towering cathedrals of life. For millions of years after plants first established footholds on terrestrial shores, vegetation had remained modest in its ambitions, low-growing carpets and simple stems that spread horizontally across landscapes, content to hug the ground for protection against the harsh realities of life beyond water's protective embrace. These pioneer communities had mastered the fundamental challenges of terrestrial existence, but they were merely preparing the stage for something far grander. Plant evolution had perfected the basic technologies of land-dwelling survival: sophisticated root systems for anchoring and water collection, waterproof coatings for moisture conservation, and intricate vascular networks capable of transporting nutrients against gravity's pull. With these innovations secured, botanical engineering was ready to explore an entirely new frontier, the vertical dimension that had remained unexploited since life began its terrestrial adventure. Across the continents, a green revolution was transforming Earth's appearance as the first great forests rose from what had been barren landscapes, scattered with only modest vegetation. These weren't the familiar trees of modern times with their woody trunks and leafy crowns, but biological skyscrapers that used entirely different architectural principles to achieve unprecedented heights and structural stability. These towering relatives of today's humble ferns and mosses grew to heights rivaling modern buildings, some reaching over 100 feet into the ancient atmosphere. Scale trees developed distinctive bark patterns that resembled intricate geometric mosaics, their massive trunks expanding to diameters that could accommodate entire ecosystems within their protective embrace. Horsetails stretched toward the sun with segmented stems so enormous they would later become coal seams, their hollow interiors providing lightweight strength that enabled remarkable vertical growth. Giant ferns unfurled fronds like living umbrellas across the forest floor, some with leaves spanning 30 feet from base to tip, creating canopies that filtered sunlight into dappled patterns never before seen on terrestrial surfaces. These primordial giants didn't rely on wood for structural support, but instead used innovative combinations of thick bark, internal pressurization, and strategic tissue placement to maintain their impressive stature. These primordial woodlands created Earth's first complex terrestrial ecosystems, providing shelter, food, and breeding grounds for an explosion of land-dwelling arthropods that had never before possessed such diverse habitats to exploit. The vertical structure of forests created multiple ecological zones, from forest floor communities to canopy environments, that supported entirely different assemblages of organisms at various heights. Millipedes the length of automobiles crawled through the understory, feeding on the abundant plant debris that accumulated beneath the towering vegetation. These armored giants found protection and sustenance among fallen fronds and decaying plant matter, while dragonflies with wingspans exceeding modern hawks patrolled forest clearings for prey, their compound eyes scanning both horizontal and vertical spaces for hunting opportunities. The atmospheric conditions within these ancient forests differed dramatically from modern environments. Oxygen levels reached concentrations of 35%, nearly double today's atmospheric content, enabling arthropods to achieve sizes impossible under current conditions, while making the forest air so rich it could support combustion with explosive intensity. These forests also began Earth's first major carbon sequestration project, pulling vast amounts of atmospheric carbon dioxide into plant tissue through photosynthesis on an unprecedented scale. The rapid burial and compression of this organic matter in swampy environments would eventually create the coal deposits that would later power human industrial civilization, transforming ancient sunlight captured by primordial plants into fossil fuel energy that would be released hundreds of millions of years later. The primeval forests had established Earth's first three-dimensional terrestrial ecosystems, proving that life could build upward as well as outward, creating biological architecture that reached toward the sky, while laying the foundation for all future woodland communities that would grace the planet's surface. The primeval forests were about to welcome their first vertebrate residents, creatures that would bring a completely new kind of intelligence and adaptability to the terrestrial world, bridging the ancient divide between aquatic and land-dwelling life through evolutionary compromises that were both revolutionary and limiting. For hundreds of millions of years, vertebrates had remained exclusively aquatic beings, their sophisticated internal organization, spinal cords, complex brains, and intricate sensory systems confined to oceanic and freshwater environments, while arthropods had successfully colonized land and established themselves among the growing forests. No vertebrate had yet managed the transition from water-breathing to air-breathing existence. But along the edges of shallow waters, where ancient forests met primordial swamps, certain fish had been conducting evolutionary experiments that would change the course of vertebrate history. These pioneering species developed increasingly muscular fins that could support their weight during brief excursions onto muddy shores, while primitive lungs supplemented their gills during periods when water became oxygen poor or when pursuit of prey led them into terrestrial environments. From these shallow waters where fish had been experimenting with air-breathing and muscular fins, Earth's first vertebrate landlubbers emerged to claim the terrestrial realm that arthropods had previously monopolized. These early amphibians represented a remarkable evolutionary compromise. creatures that could exploit the abundant resources of land-based ecosystems while maintaining essential connections to their aquatic origins. These pioneering vertebrates retained their aquatic heritage in fundamental ways that would forever define their relationship with terrestrial environments. They required water for reproduction, their jelly-like eggs lacking the protective shells that would later enable fully terrestrial breeding. Their permeable skin served dual purposes, allowing gas exchange that supplemented their primitive lungs, while simultaneously making them vulnerable to dehydration in dry conditions. Yet despite these limitations, amphibians brought vertebrate intelligence and adaptability to land-based ecosystems for the first time, introducing entirely new approaches to terrestrial survival. Their sophisticated nervous systems enabled complex behaviors impossible for arthropods, while their internal organization allowed for larger body sizes and more efficient physiological processes than any invertebrate could achieve. Some amphibians grew to enormous sizes that dwarfed their fish ancestors, becoming apex predators in the swampy environments that dominated many terrestrial landscapes. These giants, some reaching lengths of 15 feet or more, became the first large vertebrate predators on land, hunting among fallen logs and dense vegetation with the patient intelligence that characterized their lineage. Their hunting strategies combined aquatic and terrestrial techniques, using their powerful jaws to capture prey both in water and on land, while their muscular bodies enabled them to traverse the complex three-dimensional environments created by fallen trees and dense undergrowth. Unlike the arthropod predators that had previously dominated terrestrial food webs, amphibians could actively pursue prey across varied terrain and adapt their hunting behavior to changing environmental conditions. The success of these early amphibians demonstrated that vertebrate body plans could adapt to terrestrial life, while maintaining the complex internal organization that would eventually support even more sophisticated land animals. Their four-limbed locomotion, advanced sensory systems, and behavioral flexibility established the foundation for all future terrestrial vertebrate evolution. However, amphibians remained fundamentally tied to aquatic environments for reproduction and moisture regulation. Their permeable skin and jelly-like eggs limited their range to humid regions near reliable water sources, preventing them from fully exploiting the drier inland territories that were becoming available as continents expanded and climates diversified. These evolutionary constraints meant that amphibians, despite their success, represented a transitional stage rather than a final solution to vertebrate terrestrial living. Their experiments in land-based existence laid the groundwork for the next great innovation in vertebrate evolution, the development of waterproof eggs and impermeable skin that would free vertebrates from aquatic dependence entirely, enabling the rise of reptiles that could thrive in environments where amphibians could never survive. While amphibians were proving that vertebrates could succeed on land, their continued dependence on water for reproduction represented evolution's greatest remaining challenge, until life discovered how to package an entire aquatic world into a portable container no larger than a stone. The limitations that confined amphibians to waterside environments had become increasingly apparent as terrestrial landscapes diversified and expanded. Their jelly-like eggs required aquatic nurseries, their permeable skin demanded constant moisture, and their reproductive cycles remained enslaved to seasonal water availability. These constraints prevented amphibians from exploiting the vast inland territories that were opening as continents, grew larger, and climates became more varied. Yet within amphibian lineages, evolutionary experiments were quietly addressing these fundamental limitations. Some species were developing increasingly sophisticated reproductive strategies, while others were evolving skin modifications that reduced water loss. The stage was set for a breakthrough that would revolutionize vertebrate reproduction and launch the conquest of Earth's terrestrial environments. Evolution's most elegant solution to terrestrial reproduction appeared in the form of a revolutionary package that seemed almost too ingenious to have emerged through natural processes: the amniotic egg. This breakthrough innovation represented a complete reimagining of how vertebrate development could occur, transforming reproduction from an aquatic necessity into a terrestrial possibility. The amniotic egg contained everything a developing vertebrate needed to survive on dry land: a portable aquatic environment complete with food supply, waste management, and protective barriers against desiccation. The developing embryo floated within its own private ocean, cushioned by amniotic fluid that replicated the aquatic conditions that had nurtured vertebrate development for hundreds of millions of years. Multiple specialized membranes served distinct functions that collectively solved every challenge of terrestrial development. The chorion regulated gas exchange while preventing water loss, the allantois managed metabolic waste disposal, and the yolk sac provided concentrated nutrition that could sustain development from fertilization to hatching. A protective shell, whether leathery or calcified, served as the final barrier against environmental hazards. Reptiles, the first masters of this technology, suddenly found themselves liberated from the geographic constraints that had limited their amphibian ancestors. They could now lay their eggs in terrestrial environments far from water sources, opening vast new territories for vertebrate colonization that had previously remained beyond reach. The waterproof egg enabled reptiles to spread across continents with unprecedented freedom, adapting to diverse climates and ecological niches that had been completely inaccessible to amphibians. Desert environments, mountain slopes, dense forests, and open grasslands all became potential habitats for vertebrates equipped with self-contained reproductive systems. This newfound mobility triggered an explosive diversification of reptilian forms and lifestyles. Some evolved into swift predators that could pursue prey across varied terrain, while others became heavily armored herbivores capable of processing tough plant materials. Still others developed increasingly sophisticated abilities to regulate their body temperature through behavioral and physiological innovations that would eventually lead to warm-bloodedness. The reproductive revolution also enabled reptiles to exploit temporal niches that had been unavailable to amphibians. They could breed during dry seasons, colonize regions with unpredictable water availability, and establish populations in areas where standing water was rare or absent entirely. This reproductive innovation proved so successful that it would eventually give rise to two great evolutionary lineages that would dominate terrestrial environments for hundreds of millions of years. The Archosaur lineage would produce dinosaurs and their bird descendants, while the synapsid branch would lead to mammals that would later include humans. The humble egg had accomplished something remarkable, freeing vertebrate life from aquatic constraints while launching the age of terrestrial diversity that would transform Earth's land surfaces into complex ecosystems supporting an incredible variety of vertebrate forms, from tiny lizards to massive dinosaurs, from soaring pterosaurs to eventually the mammals that would inherit the Earth. As reptiles were beginning to master terrestrial environments and diversify into forms that would dominate the planet for millions of years, Earth itself was preparing to test every adaptation, every innovation, and every survival strategy that life had developed during its long evolutionary journey. The planet that had nurtured the rise of forests, the evolution of complex ecosystems, and the emergence of sophisticated vertebrates was about to undergo a transformation so severe that it would challenge the very existence of complex life. What had taken hundreds of millions of years to build would be threatened with complete destruction in a geological instant that tested the limits of biological resilience. Deep beneath the surface of what would one day become Siberia, unimaginable geological forces were building toward a release of energy that would reshape Earth's entire biosphere. Massive magma chambers, fed by mantle plumes rising from the planet's core, were preparing to unleash volcanic activity on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded human experience, or even in most of Earth's previous geological history. Earth experienced its most severe test of resilience when volcanic eruptions on an unimaginable scale began reshaping the planet's atmosphere and climate with the persistence of a geological apocalypse. These weren't isolated volcanic events, but continuous eruptions that would persist for thousands of years, fundamentally altering the chemical composition of both atmosphere and oceans. For millennia, massive flood basalts poured from the ground across an area larger than modern Europe, releasing toxic gases and ash that poisoned the air and acidified the oceans on a planetary scale. Sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide billowed into the atmosphere in concentrations that would have been instantly lethal to any modern organism, while volcanic ash blocked sunlight and disrupted photosynthesis across entire continents. The atmospheric chemistry that had enabled complex life to flourish for hundreds of millions of years began breaking down as temperatures soared beyond the tolerance of most organisms. Oxygen levels plummeted as chemical reactions consumed atmospheric oxygen faster than photosynthesis could replenish it, while greenhouse gases trapped heat so effectively that global temperatures rose to levels that challenged the survival of even the most adaptable species. Ocean chemistry underwent equally devastating changes as volcanic gases dissolved into seawater, creating acidic conditions that dissolved the shells and skeletons of marine organisms while disrupting the delicate chemical balance that supported oceanic food webs. The seas, which had been refuges of stability throughout Earth's turbulent history, became zones of chemical warfare where life struggled against poisoned water and oxygen depletion. This wasn't merely an extinction event comparable to the asteroid impact that would later eliminate dinosaurs. It was the closest Earth has ever come to losing complex life entirely. The Great Dying, as scientists would later name it, represented a bottleneck so severe that it nearly reset the evolutionary clock to its earliest chapters. Over 90% of marine species vanished as oceanic ecosystems collapsed under the combined assault of acidification, oxygen depletion, and toxic pollution. Terrestrial ecosystems fared little better as forests died under the dual stress of atmospheric poisoning and climate change, causing food webs to disintegrate from the bottom up. The great coal forests that had dominated landscapes for millions of years were reduced to scattered refugia, where only the most resilient species could survive. Many evolutionary lineages that had flourished since the Cambrian explosion disappeared forever, their genetic innovations lost as entire branches of the tree of life were pruned away by environmental catastrophe. Yet from this apocalyptic bottleneck, life would eventually demonstrate its most remarkable characteristic, the capacity for renewal even after catastrophic loss. The survivors, though few in number, carried within them the genetic diversity needed to repopulate the planet with new forms and relationships that had never existed before, proving that life's greatest innovations often emerge from its darkest moments. From the ashes of the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history, a new chapter of life was about to begin, one that would see the rise of creatures so successful they would dominate terrestrial environments for the next 200 million years, while simultaneously giving birth to evolutionary lineages that would eventually produce both the age of dinosaurs and the emergence of mammals. The planet that emerged from the Great Dying was vastly different from the lush, oxygen-rich world that had supported the great coal forests and their diverse communities. Volcanic activity had fundamentally altered atmospheric composition, creating hotter, drier conditions that challenged every survivor to adapt or perish. The elaborate ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop lay in ruins, leaving vacant ecological niches waiting for new occupants. Most groups of organisms struggled to survive in this transformed world, their evolutionary adaptations proving inadequate for the changed environmental conditions. But among the survivors were creatures whose previous innovations would prove perfectly suited for the harsh new reality that Earth had become. In the aftermath of the Great Dying, reptiles inherited a world largely emptied of its previous inhabitants, finding themselves suddenly free from the competition that had previously limited their ecological opportunities. These survivors, armed with waterproof skin that prevented fatal moisture loss and efficient kidneys that conserved precious water, proved ideally suited for the hot, dry climates that prevailed across much of the recovering planet. The reptilian innovations that had originally evolved to support terrestrial reproduction and inland colonization now became essential survival tools in a world where water was scarce and temperatures frequently exceeded the tolerance limits of other vertebrate groups. Their scaly skin provided protection against both dehydration and the intense solar radiation that penetrated the changed atmosphere, while their efficient waste processing systems enabled them to thrive in environments where other animals would quickly succumb to water loss. Freed from the competitive pressures that had previously constrained their diversification, reptiles rapidly expanded into ecological roles that had been vacated by the extinction. This wasn't merely a recovery process, but an explosive evolutionary radiation that explored new ways of being a terrestrial vertebrate, developing innovations that had never been tested during the previous era of amphibian dominance. Some reptilian lineages became swift predators that hunted across the open landscapes created by forest collapse, developing long legs and efficient locomotion that enabled them to pursue prey across varied terrain. Others evolved into heavily armored herbivores, capable of processing the tough, fibrous vegetation that dominated the recovering plant communities, their powerful jaw muscles and specialized teeth enabling them to extract nutrition from plant materials that would have been inedible to their predecessors. The early archosaurs, destined to become the ancestors of both dinosaurs and crocodiles, began experimenting with upright postures that would later enable rapid locomotion and more efficient metabolism. These postural innovations represented a fundamental shift in reptilian anatomy, moving away from the sprawling limb positions of their ancestors toward more efficient vertical support systems that would eventually enable the largest land animals in Earth's history. Meanwhile, the first mammal-like reptiles were developing parallel innovations in temperature, regulation and jaw mechanics that would eventually lead to warm-bloodedness and the sophisticated dental systems that would characterize mammals. These synapsids were exploring metabolic innovations that would enable them to remain active during cooler periods when cold-blooded reptiles became sluggish. This reptilian renaissance established the foundation for the age of dinosaurs while simultaneously nurturing the evolutionary lineages that would eventually give rise to mammals and birds. The devastated Earth was becoming a laboratory for vertebrate innovation, where empty ecological niches provided opportunities for evolutionary experimentation on an unprecedented scale, setting the stage for the most spectacular era of terrestrial vertebrate diversity that the planet would ever witness. Among the many reptilian experiments taking place in the post-extinction world, one particular group was quietly developing a combination of innovations that would prove so successful they would reshape terrestrial life for longer than any other vertebrate dynasty in Earth's history. The early Triassic landscape was filled with diverse reptilian forms, each exploring different solutions to the challenges of terrestrial existence. Armored etosaurs roamed like living tanks, powerful Rauisuchians dominated as apex predators, and various other archosaur lineages competed for ecological supremacy in the recovering ecosystems. Yet among these successful groups, some modest bipedal reptiles were developing traits that seemed insignificant but would prove revolutionary. These early dinosaur ancestors didn't immediately dominate their environments through size or obvious superiority. Instead, they perfected a subtle combination of anatomical and physiological innovations that would gradually give them decisive advantages over their competitors. Their story demonstrates that evolutionary success often emerges not from dramatic transformations, but from the accumulation of small improvements that compound into overwhelming advantage. From humble beginnings among small bipedal reptiles that stood no taller than modern dogs, a lineage emerged that would dominate terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years, a span of time so vast that it exceeds the entire duration from dinosaur extinction to the present day. Early dinosaurs possessed a revolutionary combination of traits that would prove perfectly suited for the changing world of the Mesozoic era. Their upright posture represented a fundamental breakthrough in vertebrate locomotion, enabling efficient movement that surpassed the sprawling gait of their contemporaries. While other reptiles moved with legs splayed to the sides, dinosaurs developed vertical limb positions that placed their feet directly beneath their bodies, reducing energy expenditure and enabling sustained locomotion across varied terrain. Sophisticated respiratory systems maximized oxygen extraction through innovative airflow patterns that would later be perfected in birds. Unlike the simple in and out breathing of mammals, dinosaurs developed one-way airflow through their lungs, creating more efficient gas exchange that supported higher metabolic rates and greater activity levels than their competitors could sustain. Behavioral complexity surpassed their reptilian contemporaries in ways that wouldn't be fully appreciated until modern paleontology revealed evidence of sophisticated social structures, parental care, and communication systems. These cognitive innovations enabled dinosaurs to exploit resources and respond to environmental challenges with flexibility that purely instinct-driven reptiles couldn't match. These combined innovations allowed them to outcompete other reptile groups and rapidly diversify into ecological niches ranging from swift predators that hunted in coordinated packs to massive herbivores that could process enormous quantities of plant material. This diversification wasn't merely expansion into empty niches, but active displacement of established reptile groups through superior efficiency and adaptability. Some dinosaur lineages developed elaborate social behaviors that rivaled modern mammals in their complexity. They constructed sophisticated nests with carefully arranged eggs, maintained communal nesting grounds that required social coordination, and cared for their young with devotion that included feeding, protection, and education in survival skills. Others grew to sizes that challenged the physical limits of terrestrial vertebrates, becoming the largest land animals in Earth's history. These giants, some weighing as much as 10 elephants, demonstrated that dinosaur physiology could support body masses impossible for other vertebrate groups, their efficient respiratory and circulatory systems enabling the metabolic demands of gigantism. The success of dinosaurs transformed terrestrial ecosystems in ways that extended far beyond their own lineage. Their dominance created new evolutionary pressures that drove innovations in plants, insects, and the small mammals that shared their world, establishing the ecological relationships that would define the Mesozoic era. Their reign demonstrated that evolutionary success often comes not from overwhelming superiority in any single trait, but from the right combination of innovations appearing at precisely the right moment in Earth's history, when environmental conditions favor collaborative advantages over individual adaptations. While dinosaurs were establishing their dominance across terrestrial landscapes, an even more subtle but equally transformative innovation was emerging among Earth's plant communities, one that would eventually touch every ecosystem on the planet and create some of the most beautiful partnerships in the natural world. For hundreds of millions of years, plant reproduction had been a largely solitary affair, governed by the random forces of wind and water. Ferns released clouds of spores into the air, hoping that chance currents would carry their genetic material to suitable locations. Conifers produced vast quantities of pollen that drifted on atmospheric currents, with only a tiny fraction reaching female cones to achieve fertilization. This reproductive strategy, while functional, was enormously wasteful and entirely dependent on environmental conditions beyond plant control. The plant communities of the Mesozoic world were dominated by these ancient reproductive strategies, creating landscapes filled with ferns, conifers, and cycads that had changed little since the Paleozoic era. These plants had successfully adapted to various terrestrial environments, but their reproductive limitations prevented them from fully exploiting the ecological opportunities available in the dinosaur-dominated world. Yet among these established plant lineages, evolutionary experiments were quietly taking place that would revolutionize not just plant reproduction, but the entire structure of terrestrial ecosystems. Some plants were beginning to develop more efficient reproductive strategies that could guarantee successful fertilization while minimizing the enormous energy costs of producing vast quantities of gametes. A quiet revolution began among Earth's plant communities that would eventually transform every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet, introducing a level of reproductive sophistication that exceeded anything previously achieved in the plant kingdom. Flowering plants, or angiosperms, developed an innovative reproductive strategy that combined efficiency with irresistible attraction, fundamentally changing the relationship between plants and the animal world. Instead of relying on wind to carry pollen randomly across landscapes, flowers evolved as living advertisements designed to attract specific animal partners who could provide targeted, efficient pollination services. This represented a complete reimagining of plant reproduction, transforming it from a game of chance into a system of purposeful partnership. Flowers became masterpieces of biological engineering, using bright colors that could be detected from great distances, enticing fragrances guided pollinators through complex chemical signals, and sweet nectar that provided immediate rewards for pollination services. Each floral feature was precisely calibrated to attract particular types of animal visitors, while excluding those that might steal rewards without providing effective pollination. This partnership created powerful evolutionary feedback loops that drove innovation in both plant and animal lineages. As flowers became more sophisticated in their attractions, developing deeper nectar spurs, more complex color patterns, and more specialized reward systems. Insects, birds, and mammals evolved increasingly specialized behaviors and anatomical features for accessing floral rewards. The co-evolutionary race between flowers and their pollinators produced results that were explosive in their creativity and diversity. Flowering plants diversified into forms adapted to every terrestrial environment, from desert cacti with brief but spectacular blooms to tropical orchids with intricate floral mechanisms, while their animal partners evolved into the dazzling array of pollinators that grace modern ecosystems. Bees developed branched hairs for collecting pollen, butterflies evolved long proboscises for reaching deep nectar sources, and hummingbirds perfected hovering flight that enabled them to feed from flowers while maintaining precise spatial control. Each pollinator innovation created opportunities for floral counter-innovations, establishing biological partnerships so intimate that many plants and animals became entirely dependent on each other for survival. This coevolution between plants and animals created some of nature's most intricate relationships, where the survival of each partner depends completely on the other's success. The flowering revolution had transformed reproduction from a solitary activity governed by chance into a collaborative art form that would paint the world with colors and patterns of unprecedented beauty, while establishing the foundation for the complex ecological relationships that characterize modern terrestrial ecosystems. In the shadows of the dinosaur empire, beneath the notice of the giant reptiles that commanded terrestrial ecosystems, a quiet evolutionary revolution was taking place among creatures so small they could have fit in the palm of a modern hand. Yet these humble animals were developing innovations that would one day transform the entire character of life on Earth. The Mesozoic world belonged unquestionably to dinosaurs, whose size, diversity, and ecological dominance left little room for competition from other vertebrate groups. Massive sauropods stripped vegetation from the highest tree branches, swift theropods pursued prey across open landscapes, and armored herbivores processed enormous quantities of plant material in environments where success seemed to require either gigantic size or specialized armaments that small creatures could never hope to match. Yet this very dominance of large-bodied reptiles created opportunities that went largely unnoticed by the giants themselves. The dinosaur focus on diurnal activity, large prey, and conspicuous ecological roles left numerous environmental niches unexploited, particularly those requiring small-sized nocturnal activity or behavioral flexibility that couldn't be achieved through pure physical dominance. While dinosaurs dominated the large-bodied ecological niches with spectacular success, a remarkable group of small creatures was quietly developing innovations that would eventually prove more revolutionary than any dinosaur adaptation. Early mammals, rarely larger than modern rats and often much smaller, were perfecting physiological and behavioral traits that seemed insignificant in a world of giants, but would prove decisive advantages in an uncertain future. Warm-bloodedness, or endothermy, enabled them to remain active during cold nights, when even the most sophisticated reptiles became sluggish and vulnerable. This metabolic innovation required enormous energy investments. Mammals needed to consume far more food relative to their body size than cold-blooded reptiles, but it provided the ability to function effectively across a much wider range of environmental conditions. Fur provided insulation that extended their range into cooler climates and higher altitudes, where reptiles could not maintain adequate body temperatures. This seemingly simple innovation enabled mammals to exploit temporal and spatial niches that remained forever beyond reptilian reach, creating ecological opportunities that didn't require direct competition with dinosaur giants. Perhaps most importantly, mammals were developing increasingly sophisticated parental care systems that represented a fundamental shift in reproductive strategy. Rather than laying eggs and departing like most reptiles, mammals invested tremendous energy in offspring survival and education through extended periods of dependency that could last weeks or months. Nursing their young with milk provided nutrition precisely calibrated to support rapid brain and body development, while extended parental care created opportunities for learning and cultural transmission that exceeded anything seen in reptilian lineages. Young mammals could learn from their parents' experiences, developing behavioral flexibility that enabled rapid adaptation to changing environmental conditions. These behavioral innovations created the foundation for complex social relationships and information transfer systems that would eventually support advanced intelligence. Advanced hearing and touch senses, combined with brains that were large relative to body size, enabled mammals to exploit nocturnal niches through sophisticated sensory processing that rivaled or exceeded dinosaur capabilities despite their small stature. Enhanced tactile sensitivity through specialized whiskers and sensitive paws provided detailed environmental information in low-light conditions, while acute hearing enabled detection of both prey and predators across ranges that gave small mammals significant advantages over their reptilian contemporaries in nocturnal environments. Though they remained small and secretive during the age of dinosaurs, living in burrows, tree hollows, and other refugia where their size was an advantage rather than a limitation, mammals were accumulating the adaptations that would serve them extraordinarily well when ecological opportunity finally arose. The mammalian strategy of investing in intelligence, behavioral flexibility, and sophisticated parental care would prove more durable than dinosaur emphasis on size and physical specialization, demonstrating that evolutionary success sometimes comes not from dominating current conditions, but from developing the tools needed to thrive when those conditions inevitably change. The mammals that had spent over 100 million years developing their innovations in the shadows of dinosaur dominance were about to witness the most dramatic change of fortune in Earth's history, a cosmic accident that would instantly transform their patient evolutionary preparation into the key to inheriting an entire planet. For eons, the solar system had been a relatively peaceful place, with most of the chaotic bombardment that characterized Earth's early history having subsided into the stable orbital patterns that allowed complex ecosystems to flourish. Dinosaurs had grown comfortable in their dominance, mammals had adapted to their limited niches, and life had settled into rhythms that seemed destined to continue indefinitely. Yet, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, gravitational perturbations were slowly altering the orbit of a massive chunk of rock and metal that had been circling the Sun peacefully since the formation of the solar system. This cosmic mountain, perhaps 6 miles in diameter and containing more mass than Mount Everest, was beginning a collision course with Earth that would end one of the most successful evolutionary dynasties in planetary history. The object that would end the age of dinosaurs had been traveling through space for millions of years, its trajectory gradually modified by the gravitational influences of Jupiter and other planets until it finally intersected Earth's orbital path at precisely the moment when our planet happened to be in the same location, a cosmic coincidence with consequences that would reshape the entire future of terrestrial life. 66 million years ago, on what began as an ordinary day in the late Cretaceous period, Earth faced an apocalyptic moment that would forever alter the trajectory of life's evolution. The impact occurred with such violence that it challenged the imagination. A massive asteroid struck the planet with the kinetic energy of billions of nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously, instantly vaporizing both the asteroid and enormous quantities of Earth's crust. The collision created a crater over 100 miles wide in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, while the impact generated temperatures hotter than the surface of the Sun and pressures that transformed solid rock into plasma. Shockwaves propagated around the globe at speeds exceeding the velocity of sound, triggering earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunami that devastated coastal regions thousands of miles from the impact site. Perhaps most catastrophically, the impact hurled billions of tons of pulverized rock, ash, and debris into the atmosphere, creating a global shroud that blocked sunlight and triggered a planetary winter lasting for months. The sky darkened to perpetual twilight as fine particles remained suspended in the atmosphere, reflecting solar radiation back into space and dropping global temperatures to levels that challenged the survival of all large organisms. Photosynthesis ground to a halt as plants died without adequate sunlight, collapsing food webs from the bottom up in a cascade of ecological destruction that doomed any organism dependent on abundant vegetation. The great dinosaurs, after ruling terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years with unparalleled success, found their size and metabolic demands transformed from evolutionary advantages into fatal liabilities. The massive herbivores that had dominated Cretaceous landscapes could not survive on the sparse vegetation that remained, while the carnivores that preyed upon them faced starvation as their food sources disappeared. Within a remarkably short period, perhaps just a few years, the great dinosaurs vanished along with 3/4 of all species on Earth, ending one of evolution's most spectacular success stories. Yet this catastrophe also created unprecedented opportunity for the survivors. Mammals, birds, and other small animals that could subsist on seeds, insects, and detritus found themselves suddenly liberated from reptilian dominance, inheriting ecological niches that had been unavailable for over 100 million years. The asteroid impact had reset evolution's clock, opening vast territories that would soon be filled by entirely new forms of life that would reshape the planet's ecosystems in ways the dinosaur world had never imagined. The silence that followed the great catastrophe was unlike anything Earth had experienced since complex life began. Vast landscapes emptied of their former giants, ecosystems simplified to their most basic components, and ecological niches that had been filled for over 100 million years, suddenly vacant and waiting for new occupants to discover their possibilities. For the small mammals that had survived the asteroid winter by subsisting on seeds, insects, and detritus, this transformed world represented the greatest opportunity in vertebrate history. Creatures that had spent their entire evolutionary heritage confined to burrows, tree hollows, and nocturnal activity patterns suddenly found themselves free to explore terrestrial environments in broad daylight without fear of giant predators or overwhelming competition from established giants. The early survivors were modest in size and ambition, shrew-like creatures, primitive primates no larger than modern squirrels, and various other small forms that had endured the catastrophe through their ability to survive on minimal resources. Yet within these humble lineages lay the genetic and behavioral foundations for one of evolution's most spectacular adaptive radiations. In the empty world left behind by the dinosaurs, mammals began an evolutionary explosion that would transform Earth's ecosystems with creativity and diversity that rivaled the Cambrian explosion in its scope and innovation. Freed from predation by giant reptiles and liberated from intense competition for food resources, mammalian lineages diversified at unprecedented rates into ecological roles that had been occupied exclusively by dinosaurs for over 100 million years. This wasn't merely a process of ecological replacement, but a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be a large terrestrial vertebrate. Mammals brought entirely different approaches to survival, emphasizing behavioral flexibility, social cooperation, and intelligence over the physical adaptations that had characterized dinosaur success. Some mammalian lineages grew enormous within just a few million years, evolving into ground-dwelling giants that grazed vast grasslands with efficiency that exceeded anything dinosaurs had achieved. These emerging megafauna developed complex digestive systems capable of processing tough plant materials, while their social behaviors enabled coordinated movement across landscapes in herds that could exploit resources more effectively than solitary giants. Others took to the trees with unprecedented sophistication, developing the opposable thumbs and stereoscopic vision that would eventually characterize primates, while establishing the foundation for the intelligence and manual dexterity that would one day enable tool use and technology. These arboreal mammals created entirely new ecological relationships with forest ecosystems, developing fruit-eating behaviors that aided plant reproduction while establishing the complex three-dimensional communities that characterize modern tropical forests. Still others made the remarkable transition back to aquatic environments, becoming the whales and dolphins that would rule marine ecosystems with intelligence and social complexity that no marine reptile had ever achieved. These mammalian ocean dwellers developed echolocation, complex communication systems, and social behaviors that transformed marine environments from relatively simple predator-prey relationships into sophisticated acoustic communities. This explosive adaptive radiation was powered by mammalian innovations that had been developing throughout the age of dinosaurs, enhanced brain structure that supported rapid learning, sophisticated social behaviors that enabled cultural transmission across generations, and advanced parental care, systems that allowed knowledge to accumulate within lineages over time. Mammals were not merely replacing dinosaurs in existing ecological roles, but exploring entirely new ways of being large terrestrial vertebrates. Where dinosaurs had relied primarily on size, armor, and specialized physical adaptations, mammals emphasized intelligence, cooperation, and behavioral flexibility that enabled rapid adaptation to changing environmental conditions. The mammalian approach to terrestrial dominance proved so successful that within 10 million years of the dinosaur extinction, mammals had not only filled the vacant ecological niches, but had created entirely new ones that had never existed during the reptilian age. The age of mammals had begun, establishing the foundation for ecosystems that would eventually support the emergence of human intelligence and technology. Even as mammals were celebrating their evolutionary success in the post-dinosaur world, Earth itself was beginning another transformation that would prove just as dramatic as the asteroid impact, a gradual cooling that would reshape continents, redirect ocean currents, and fundamentally alter the stage upon which all future life would perform. The planet that emerged from the Cretaceous extinction had been a warm, humid world where tropical forests stretched almost to the poles, and seasonal variation was minimal across most latitudes. Palm trees grew in Alaska, crocodiles basked in Arctic rivers, and the temperature gradient from equator to poles was far gentler than anything modern organisms have experienced. This greenhouse world had supported the lush vegetation that enabled large dinosaurs to thrive and had provided the stable, warm conditions that early mammals inherited. But the same geological forces that had shaped Earth's history throughout deep time were continuing their patient work, slowly moving continents toward configurations that would dramatically alter global climate patterns. The gradual northward drift of land masses was changing ocean circulation in ways that would have profound consequences for atmospheric heat distribution and precipitation patterns. As mammals diversified and flourished in their newly inherited territories, Earth's climate began a gradual transformation that would reshape ecosystems across the globe, with changes so slow that individual species could adapt, yet so profound that they would completely reorganize the biological communities of entire continents. The warm, humid conditions that had characterized much of the Mesozoic era slowly gave way to cooler, more variable climates, as continental positions shifted and ocean circulation patterns changed in response to the new geographical arrangements. Antarctica's movement toward the South Pole gradually isolated it from warm ocean currents, allowing ice sheets to form for the first time in millions of years. This cooling trend had cascading effects that extended far beyond simple temperature reduction. Atmospheric circulation patterns shifted, concentrating moisture in polar regions while creating vast inland areas with seasonal temperature extremes and dramatically reduced rainfall. The reliable year-round warmth and humidity that had supported global forest ecosystems began giving way to more variable conditions that challenged plant communities adapted to stable tropical climates. Forests, which had dominated terrestrial landscapes since the Carboniferous, began retreating toward equatorial regions and coastal areas with reliable water sources, leaving behind open landscapes that represented entirely new habitat types on Earth. These emerging environments would become the stage for evolutionary experiments that had never been possible in the forest-dominated world of previous eras. Grasses, which had been relatively minor components of plant communities during the age of dinosaurs, began expanding into these open spaces with remarkable success. These seemingly humble plants possessed adaptations that made them ideally suited for the new climatic conditions. Root systems that could exploit soil moisture efficiently, growth patterns that enabled rapid recovery from drought or grazing, and reproductive strategies that allowed them to colonize disturbed areas quickly. The expansion of grasslands created the first extensive open ecosystems that had existed since the early terrestrial colonizations, fundamentally changing the ecological opportunities available to animal communities. This transition from forest to grassland created new niches for mammals adapted to open country living, species that could run swiftly across firm ground, process tough vegetation efficiently, and coordinate group movements across territories measured in hundreds of square miles. The cooling world was selecting for entirely new survival strategies that emphasized endurance, social coordination, and dietary flexibility over the climbing abilities, individual foraging, and fruit-eating specializations that had characterized forest-dwelling mammals. This environmental transformation would drive the evolution of some of the most spectacular mammals ever to walk the earth, while setting the stage for the emergence of the human lineage in the grasslands and savannas of Africa. The cooling world that was reshaping Earth's climate had created something unprecedented in the planet's history: vast open landscapes that demanded entirely new approaches to survival, setting the stage for one of evolution's most innovative experiments in ecological organization. For hundreds of millions of years, terrestrial ecosystems had been dominated by vertical communities organized around trees and woody plants. Forests had provided the architectural framework for life on land, creating multi-layered environments where organisms specialized for different heights, from forest floor decomposers to canopy dwellers that rarely touched the ground. This three-dimensional organization had supported enormous diversity, but had always been limited by the fundamental requirements of tree growth: adequate rainfall, protection from fire, and soil conditions suitable for deep root systems. The climate changes that were transforming Earth's environment challenged these forest-based assumptions about terrestrial organization. As rainfall became more seasonal and temperatures more variable, vast areas of land became unsuitable for forest development, creating ecological vacuum that evolution would need to fill with entirely new solutions. The answer emerged from some of the most humble and previously overlooked members of plant communities: grasses that had survived as minor understory components in forest ecosystems but had been waiting for their evolutionary moment. These seemingly simple plants possessed architectural innovations that would prove perfectly suited for the emerging environmental conditions. Across continents, a new type of ecosystem was emerging that would fundamentally alter the relationship between plants and animals, creating ecological partnerships more intimate and mutually beneficial than anything that had existed in forest communities. Grasslands represented an evolutionary innovation as significant as the first forests. Plant communities specifically adapted to disturbance, drought, and grazing pressure that could not only survive these challenges, but actually thrive under conditions that would destroy forest ecosystems. Grasses had evolved growth patterns that represented a complete reimagining of plant architecture. Unlike trees and shrubs that concentrated their vital growing tissues in vulnerable above-ground locations, grasses developed innovative strategies that kept their most important structures below ground, safe from fire, drought, and herbivore damage. Their growth points, called meristems, were located at the base of leaves and protected by layers of older tissue, enabling grasses to continue growing even after their above-ground portions had been consumed by grazers or destroyed by fire. This meant that what appeared to be devastating damage to grassland plants was actually beneficial disturbance that removed dead material and stimulated new growth. Even more remarkably, grasses evolved to make their above-ground portions into expendable food sources that actually benefited from being eaten. Rather than defending their tissues with toxins or structural barriers like most plants, grasses became nutritious and palatable to herbivores, evolving chemical compositions that made them attractive food sources, while ensuring that grazing would stimulate rather than inhibit their growth. This led to a revolutionary partnership between plants and animals that exceeded anything seen in forest ecosystems. Grasses evolved to be highly nutritious and digestible to grazers, while grazing mammals evolved increasingly sophisticated digestive systems capable of extracting energy from cellulose and other tough plant materials that had previously been largely inedible to vertebrates. The coevolution between grasses and grazers created feedback loops that drove innovation in both plant and animal lineages. Herbivorous mammals developed complex stomach chambers, extended digestive tracts, and symbiotic relationships with cellulose-digesting bacteria that enabled them to extract maximum nutrition from grass-based diets. The result was an explosion of large herbivorous mammals, horses, cattle, antelopes, and their relatives that roamed grasslands in vast herds containing thousands or even millions of individuals. These massive herbivore populations, in turn, supported equally impressive predator communities and scavenger networks, creating some of Earth's most dynamic and visually spectacular ecosystems. The grassland revolution had demonstrated evolution's remarkable ability to create entirely new forms of ecological organization, transforming Earth's terrestrial environments from primarily vertical forest communities into horizontal partnerships between plants and animals that would define the character of much of the planet's land surface for millions of years to come. Of all the continents reshaped by the cooling world and the grassland revolution, one landmass was destined to become the stage for evolution's most ambitious experiment, a vast natural laboratory where geological forces, climate change, and biological innovation would converge to produce the most remarkable development in 4 billion years of life on Earth. The continent, that would one day be called Africa, occupied a unique position in the changing world of the Cenozoic era. Its location straddling the equator ensured tropical warmth even as global temperatures cooled, while its massive size created diverse climate zones that ranged from humid forests to emerging grasslands. Most importantly, this continent was undergoing geological transformations that would create an unparalleled diversity of environments within relatively small geographic areas. Deep beneath Africa's surface, mantle plumes were rising with sufficient force to begin splitting the continent apart. This geological violence was literally tearing the land apart, creating rift valleys, uplifting mountain ranges, and establishing new drainage patterns that would fundamentally alter regional climates and ecosystems across millions of square miles. Africa became evolution's most creative workshop, as climate changes and geological activity created a complex mosaic of environments that challenged life to adapt in ways that had never been tested before. The formation of the East African Rift Valley represented one of the most significant geological events of the Cenozoic era, creating a massive scar across the continent that would reshape both landscapes and the evolutionary trajectories of every organism living within its influence. The Rift Valley system created a rain shadow effect that dramatically altered precipitation patterns across eastern Africa. Mountains uplifted by the rifting process intercepted moisture-laden winds from the Indian Ocean, causing rainfall to condense on eastern slopes while leaving western areas increasingly dry. This geological transformation created a rain shadow that turned lush forests into more open woodlands and grasslands, establishing the environmental gradients that would drive some of evolution's most important innovations. Volcanic activity periodically disrupted established ecosystems and created new ecological opportunities through both destructive and constructive processes. Volcanic eruptions temporarily devastated local environments, but also deposited nutrient-rich ash that enhanced soil fertility, while the creation of new topographical features established fresh microclimates and ecological niches that had never existed before. This environmental complexity became a crucible for mammalian evolution unlike anywhere else on Earth, particularly among the primates that had been evolving in African forest for millions of years. The gradual transition from continuous forest to a patchwork of woodlands, grasslands, and gallery forests created selection pressures that favored adaptability and behavioral flexibility over specialized adaptation to any single environment type. Some primate lineages adapted to increasingly open environments by developing larger body sizes that enabled them to travel efficiently across open ground between scattered forest patches. Others evolved more efficient bipedal locomotion that freed their hands for carrying food, tools, and offspring, while providing elevated visual access for spotting both opportunities and dangers across open landscapes. Enhanced social cooperation became essential for survival in environments where predators were more numerous and food sources more widely distributed than in forest habitats. Group foraging strategies, coordinated defense against predators, and information sharing about resource locations all became critical survival skills that drove the evolution of increasingly sophisticated communication and social organization. The varying landscapes of Africa also preserved multiple evolutionary pathways simultaneously, maintaining forest-dwelling lineages in stable woodland areas, while fostering the evolution of more terrestrial forms in newly opened grasslands. This environmental diversity meant that evolution could experiment with different approaches to primate survival without losing successful adaptations that might prove valuable under changing conditions. This unique combination of environmental diversity and evolutionary pressure created the perfect conditions for the emergence of the most significant development in Earth's history, the evolution of human ancestors who would eventually develop language, technology, and consciousness sophisticated enough to contemplate their own evolutionary origins and place in the cosmic story that had been unfolding for billions of years. Within the diverse primate communities that were experimenting with life in Africa's transforming landscapes, one seemingly simple innovation was about to trigger the most profound transformation in the history of consciousness, a change so subtle in its beginning yet so revolutionary in its consequences that it would eventually enable life to understand its own cosmic origins. The primate lineages that had spread across Africa's mosaic of forests, woodlands, and emerging grasslands were all facing similar challenges as their environment became increasingly fragmented and unpredictable. Food sources that had once been abundant within continuous forest canopies now required travel across open ground to reach scattered groves and fruit trees. Predators that had been manageable in the three-dimensional refuge of forest environments became deadly threats in open country, where escape routes were limited and visibility was crucial for survival. Most primate groups adapted to these challenges through variations on familiar themes, becoming larger and more aggressive, developing better climbing abilities for rapid escape to trees, or evolving more efficient digestive systems that could process lower quality foods available in woodland environments. These were successful adaptations that enabled various lineages to thrive in Africa's changing world. Yet among the various primate lineages adapting to Africa's changing landscapes, one group was developing a revolutionary solution to life in increasingly open environments that would prove far more significant than anyone could have imagined. Rather than perfecting traditional primate adaptations, these early hominids discovered the advantages of habitual upright walking, a form of locomotion that had occasionally been used by other primates, but had never become a primary mode of movement. Bipedal locomotion initially offered practical advantages that were immediately useful for survival in open environments. Walking upright freed the hands for carrying tools, food, and offspring across the distances that were becoming necessary for survival, while providing elevated visual access for spotting both predators and prey across open terrain that could mean the difference between life and death. But the consequences of walking upright extended far beyond these immediate practical benefits. This seemingly simple change in posture triggered cascading anatomical, behavioral, and eventually cognitive transformations that would distinguish this lineage from all other primates, and ultimately from all other organisms in Earth's history. Pelvic modifications required for efficient bipedalism had unexpected consequences for reproduction and development. The narrower pelvis needed for upright walking created constraints on birth canal size that, combined with the energy demands of larger brains, led to earlier births and extended periods of infant helplessness. This apparent disadvantage became a profound opportunity for extended learning and cultural transmission. Freed hands enabled increasingly sophisticated tool use and environmental manipulation that went far beyond anything other primates had achieved. These early hominids began fashioning implements from stone, wood, and bone with precision and forethought that demonstrated planning abilities and technical innovation unprecedented in the animal kingdom. Social cooperation became not just advantageous but essential for survival in open landscapes, where individual vulnerability required group coordination for effective foraging, predator defense, and child care. This necessity drove the evolution of complex communication systems that gradually developed the precision and abstraction that would eventually become language. The combination of freed hands, enhanced social cooperation, and extended infant development periods created opportunities for cultural transmission of knowledge across generations. Skills, techniques, and innovations could be taught to offspring and shared within groups, enabling cumulative cultural evolution that accelerated far beyond the pace of genetic change. The simple act of standing up had initiated a feedback loop between locomotion, technology, and social behavior that would grow increasingly powerful over millions of years. Each innovation enabled new possibilities that drove further innovations, creating a spiral of development that would eventually produce the most remarkable phenomenon in Earth's history. Conscious intelligence capable of understanding its own evolutionary development, questioning its place in the universe, and contemplating the cosmic processes that had created the very atoms from which thinking brains were constructed. The upright walkers who had emerged from Africa's evolutionary laboratory possessed remarkable innovations in locomotion, tool use, and social cooperation, yet they remained fundamentally limited by the same constraints that governed all other animals: dependency on daylight hours, vulnerability to temperature extremes, and reliance on foods they could digest with their natural physiology. Then came a discovery that would shatter these ancient limitations and launch humanity toward a completely different relationship with the natural world. For millions of years, fire had been a terrifying force of destruction that all animals instinctively fled. Lightning strikes ignited grassland blazes that consumed vast territories, while volcanic activity created infernos that could devastate entire ecosystems. Every creature's survival depended on recognizing fire as a deadly threat to be avoided at all costs, making the distance between flames and safety the difference between life and death. Yet among the early human lineages that were developing increasingly sophisticated tool use and problem-solving abilities, some individuals began observing fire with curiosity rather than pure terror. Perhaps they noticed that burned areas often produced new plant growth that attracted game animals, or that fires could drive prey into predictable locations, or that cooked meat left by natural fires was easier to chew and digest than raw flesh. The transition from fearing fire to controlling fire represented one of the most profound cognitive leaps in the history of life on Earth. This wasn't merely learning to use a tool, but learning to harness and maintain a process, to become partners with a phenomenon that had previously been an implacable enemy. The ability to keep fires burning required planning, cooperation, and understanding of cause and effect that exceeded anything demonstrated by other species. The mastery of fire marked humanity's first great technological revolution, transforming our ancestors from clever animals into ecosystem engineers capable of reshaping their environment in ways that no organism had ever achieved. This wasn't simply adoption of another survival strategy, but the beginning of humanity's transition from being subject to natural forces to becoming a force of nature itself. Fire extended the day in ways that revolutionized human social organization. The artificial illumination provided by controlled flames enabled activities to continue long after sunset, effectively doubling the productive hours available for tool-making, food preparation, and social interaction. This extension of active time provided opportunities for cultural development that had never existed during the purely daylight-bound existence of their ancestors. The protection fire offered from nocturnal predators enabled human communities to sleep safely on the ground, rather than retreating to trees or caves, while the warmth it provided made survival possible in climates and seasons that would otherwise have been lethal. These basic advantages fundamentally expanded the environmental range available to human populations. Cooking unlocked nutritional resources that had been largely inaccessible to previous human ancestors. The application of heat broke down tough plant fibers, made tubers and grains digestible, and neutralized toxins that had made many foods dangerous or impossible to consume. Perhaps most importantly, cooked meat provided concentrated nutrition with reduced energy expenditure for digestion, supporting the brain growth that characterized human evolution. But fire's importance extended far beyond these practical applications. The hearth became the focal point for social gatherings where knowledge, stories, and cultural innovations were shared across generations in ways that had never been possible in purely nomadic existence. Around fires, human communities developed the complex language skills and cultural transmission systems that would accelerate technological and social evolution beyond the pace of genetic change. Fire also enabled geographic expansion into previously uninhabitable environments. Humans could now survive in colder climates and higher altitudes. That would have been lethal to their ancestors, opening continents and mountain ranges that had been forever beyond the reach of tropical adapted primates. The controlled use of fire had given humans their first taste of the technological mastery that would eventually reshape the entire planet, demonstrating that intelligence could override natural limitations and transform environmental challenges into opportunities for expansion and innovation. The fire-keeping humans who had spread across continents and adapted to diverse environments had achieved something unprecedented in the history of life: the ability to thrive in almost any terrestrial habitat through technological innovation rather than biological adaptation. Yet despite their remarkable success, they remained bound by the same fundamental constraint that had limited every organism since life began: dependency on food sources they could not control or predict. For hundreds of thousands of years, human communities had perfected the arts of hunting and gathering, developing sophisticated knowledge of seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and plant resources that enabled them to extract sustenance from environments ranging from tropical forests to Arctic tundra. Their success was evident in their global distribution and growing population numbers, yet they remained forever at the mercy of natural abundance and scarcity. Droughts could force entire communities to migrate or face starvation, while the unpredictable movements of game animals meant that even skilled hunters might return empty-handed for days or weeks. Human intelligence had enabled remarkable adaptability, but it had not yet freed humanity from the ancient rhythm of feast and famine that governed all wild organisms. Then, in various regions around the world, and at roughly the same time in human history, communities began experimenting with a completely different relationship to the natural world, one that would prove even more transformative than the mastery of fire. Approximately 10,000 years ago, human communities around the world independently discovered how to transform wild plants and animals into reliable food sources through domestication and cultivation, launching what would become known as the agricultural revolution. This represented a fundamental shift from hunting and gathering to actively managing ecosystems for human benefit, transforming humans from passive consumers of natural abundance into active producers of their own sustenance. The transition began with careful observation of the plants and animals that provided the most reliable food sources. Humans learned to select seeds from the largest, most productive plants, gradually creating crop varieties that were far more nutritious and reliable than their wild ancestors. Generation by generation, selective breeding enhanced desirable traits while reducing characteristics that made wild plants difficult to harvest or process. Wheat evolved larger seeds and non-shattering seed heads that made harvesting efficient, while corn developed from a wild grass with tiny kernels into the large cobbed crop that could feed entire communities. Rice adapted to flooded field conditions that maximized yields, while potatoes developed the energy-dense tubers that could sustain populations through long winters. Simultaneously, humans began domesticating animals that could provide not just meat but also milk, labor, and transportation, while serving as living storage systems for calories and protein. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs transformed from wild game into managed livestock that could convert plant materials humans couldn't digest into high-quality protein and other valuable resources. Agriculture enabled human populations to grow dramatically and concentrate in permanent settlements for the first time in human history. Rather than limiting group sizes to what the surrounding landscape could support through hunting and gathering, agricultural communities could sustain much larger populations through intensive food production on relatively small areas of land. This concentration of population created the social complexity necessary for specialization, trade, and technological innovation on scales that had never been possible in nomadic societies. Individuals could dedicate their entire lives to specific crafts, developing expertise in metalworking, pottery, textile production, and other technologies that required sustained focus and accumulated knowledge. Cities emerged as centers of learning and culture where agricultural surpluses supported artisans, priests, and scholars who could dedicate their lives to advancing human knowledge rather than securing daily sustenance. These urban centers became crucibles of innovation where ideas, techniques, and technologies could be shared, refined, and passed on to future generations. The ability to control food production had freed humanity from the fundamental constraints that limited all other species, launching a period of exponential growth in population, technology, and environmental impact that would eventually enable humans to reshape entire landscapes and ultimately to understand the cosmic processes that had created the elements from which their own bodies and civilizations were constructed. The agricultural civilizations that had emerged across the globe had created unprecedented opportunities for human intellectual development, freeing scholars and thinkers from the daily struggle for survival while providing the accumulated knowledge of generations through written records and formal education. Yet for thousands of years, human understanding of the natural world remained dominated by explanations that attributed natural phenomena to supernatural forces, divine intervention, and mythological narratives that, while culturally meaningful, provided little predictive power or practical understanding of natural processes. Thunder was the anger of gods, disease was divine punishment or demonic possession, and the movements of celestial bodies were interpreted as omens and messages rather than mechanical processes governed by physical laws. These explanations satisfied the human need for meaning and provided frameworks for social organization, but they offered limited ability to predict, control, or manipulate natural phenomena for human benefit. Yet within the scholarly communities supported by agricultural surpluses, a revolutionary approach to understanding the world was gradually emerging, one that would prove far more powerful for revealing the actual mechanisms underlying natural phenomena than any previous system of knowledge. Throughout most of human history, natural phenomena had been explained through mythology and supernatural intervention, but gradually a new approach to understanding the world began emerging that would transform humanity's relationship with reality itself. This scientific method emphasized careful observation, experimentation, and logical reasoning as pathways to reliable knowledge about natural processes, rather than relying on tradition, authority, or supernatural explanation. The transformation began with individuals who were willing to question established explanations and test their ideas against careful observations of the natural world. Rather than accepting that celestial movements were divine messages, early astronomers began mapping the movements of celestial bodies with mathematical precision, discovering predictable patterns that could be calculated and forecast with remarkable accuracy. These systematic observations revealed discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe. Earth was not the center of creation, but a planet orbiting an ordinary star among billions of others, while the Sun itself was merely one member of a vast galaxy containing more stars than there were grains of sand on all the beaches of Earth. Physicists discovered fundamental laws governing motion, energy, and matter that applied universally across all scales of existence, from the smallest particles to the largest celestial bodies. These mathematical relationships demonstrated that the same principles that governed falling objects on Earth also determined the orbits of planets around the Sun, revealing a universe governed by comprehensible laws rather than arbitrary supernatural whims. Biologists began recognizing the deep connections between all living things and the processes through which species change over time, discovering that humans shared common ancestry with all other life forms through evolutionary processes that could be studied, understood, and documented through careful observation of both living organisms and fossil evidence. This scientific revolution transformed humanity's relationship with nature from passive observation to active investigation, revealing the mechanical processes underlying phenomena that had previously seemed magical or incomprehensible. Rather than accepting natural events as mysterious or supernatural, scientists developed methods for testing hypotheses, conducting controlled experiments, and building reliable knowledge through cumulative investigation. The scientific method also demonstrated that human intelligence, when properly applied through systematic observation and logical reasoning, could understand the deepest workings of reality. This realization was profoundly empowering, suggesting that no natural phenomenon was beyond human comprehension if approached with appropriate methods and sufficient patience. The success of scientific investigation in revealing natural laws and predicting natural phenomena set the stage for technological developments that would eventually enable our species to leave Earth and explore the cosmos directly, transforming humans from passive observers of the universe into active participants in cosmic exploration and discovery. Through science, humanity was beginning to understand its place in the vast cosmic story that had been unfolding for billions of years, recognizing that the same physical laws that govern distant galaxies also operated within human bodies, and that the elements forged in stellar cores now composed the brains capable of contemplating their own cosmic origins. The scientific awakening that had revealed the mathematical laws governing natural phenomena was about to trigger a transformation in human capability that would dwarf even the agricultural revolution in its speed and scope, one that would literally harness the concentrated energy of ancient sunlight to power a complete reconstruction of human civilization. For thousands of years after the development of agriculture, human societies had been fundamentally limited by the energy sources available to muscle power, human and animal strength supplemented by wind and flowing water. These energy constraints meant that production, transportation, and construction remained bounded by biological limitations that had remained essentially unchanged since the beginning of civilization. Skilled craftspeople could produce remarkable works of art and engineering, but always within the limitations imposed by what human hands could accomplish. Transportation moved only as fast as horses could run or ships could sail, while manufacturing remained confined to what individual artisans could create through personal skill and dedication. Yet the same scientific investigations that had revealed the laws of motion, heat, and chemistry were beginning to suggest possibilities for harnessing natural forces in ways that had never been attempted. Scientists were discovering that heat could be converted into mechanical motion, that combustion could produce controlled energy release, and that the chemical energy stored in certain materials could be released and directed for human purposes. The breakthrough came when human ingenuity learned to tap into energy, sources that had been accumulating in Earth's crust for hundreds of millions of years. The compressed remains of ancient forests and prehistoric marine organisms that had been transformed by geological processes into coal, oil, and natural gas. The discovery of how to harness fossil fuels triggered the most rapid transformation in human society since the development of agriculture, launching what historians would call the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines, powered by coal that had formed from ancient forests millions of years earlier, provided energy sources that far exceeded anything available through human and animal muscle power. This represented a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with energy and materials. Rather than being limited to the renewable energy that could be captured through contemporary biological processes, humans could now access the concentrated solar energy that had been stored underground for geological time periods. The Industrial Revolution mechanized production, transportation, and communication, while enabling unprecedented population growth and urbanization. Factories could now produce goods in quantities and qualities impossible through individual craftsmanship, using steam-powered machinery that could operate continuously and with precision that exceeded human capability. Steam-powered trains and ships connected distant communities through trade networks spanning continents, shrinking travel times from months to weeks and enabling the movement of goods and people on scales that transformed global commerce and cultural exchange. Geographic barriers that had separated human communities for millennia suddenly became manageable obstacles rather than insurmountable boundaries. The exploitation of coal, oil, and natural gas meant that humans were literally burning Earth's ancient history to fuel modern civilization. The carbon that had been locked away by photosynthesis in Carboniferous forests was being released back into the atmosphere, while the compressed remains of prehistoric marine organisms provided the chemical energy that powered industrial machinery. This industrialization created wealth and technological capabilities beyond anything previous human societies had imagined, enabling the construction of cities, transportation networks, and manufacturing systems that supported populations and living standards unprecedented in human history. But this industrial transformation also began altering Earth's atmospheric chemistry and climate systems at scales comparable to geological processes. The massive release of fossil carbon was changing atmospheric composition in ways that hadn't occurred since major volcanic episodes in Earth's deep past. Humanity had become a planetary force capable of triggering environmental changes that would affect all life on Earth, marking our species' transition from local ecosystem management to global environmental influence. The same fossil fuels that powered industrial civilization were beginning to alter the planet's climate system, demonstrating that human technology had reached scales where it could influence Earth's fundamental life support systems. The industrial civilization that had learned to harness fossil fuels and reshape entire landscapes was about to achieve something that would have seemed impossible to every previous generation of humans: the ability to slip the bonds of Earth's gravity and venture into the cosmic realm that had previously been accessible only through imagination and mathematical calculation. Throughout human history, the sky had been an infinite source of wonder and mystery. Ancient astronomers had mapped the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable precision, while modern scientists had revealed the true nature of stars, planets, and galaxies through careful observation and theoretical investigation. Yet despite all this accumulated knowledge, the cosmos had remained forever beyond physical reach, separated from Earth by distances and energy requirements that seemed to place space exploration permanently in the realm of fantasy. The same scientific understanding that had powered the Industrial Revolution was beginning to suggest that the energy requirements for escaping Earth's gravitational field might be achievable through controlled chemical reactions. The principles of motion and energy that Newton had discovered could theoretically enable human artifacts to reach the velocities needed to orbit Earth or even travel to other worlds, if sufficient energy could be generated and properly directed. The breakthrough came when human engineering learned to harness the explosive force of chemical reactions with sufficient precision and control to create sustained thrust. Rather than using combustion simply to heat steam or drive machinery, rocket technology channeled the rapid expansion of burning chemicals to propel vehicles at velocities that had never been achieved by any terrestrial transportation system. For the first time in Earth's history, life developed the capability to leave its planetary cradle and explore the cosmos directly. Rockets powered by controlled explosions launched human artifacts and eventually humans themselves beyond Earth's gravitational embrace, fulfilling dreams that had inspired countless generations, while simultaneously opening an entirely new chapter in the relationship between life and the universe. The achievement represented more than just technological advancement. It marked the moment when Earth-based life gained the ability to extend itself beyond the boundaries of its home planet. After 4 billion years of evolution confined to terrestrial and marine environments, consciousness had developed the capability to venture into the cosmic realm from which all matter and energy had originally emerged. The view of Earth from space provided a perspective that no human had ever experienced, and that transformed understanding of our planet's place in the cosmic context. Seeing Earth as a blue marble suspended in cosmic darkness, a small, precious sphere of life surrounded by the vast emptiness of space, revealed our planet's fragility and interconnectedness in ways that no terrestrial observation could convey. This cosmic perspective demonstrated that Earth had no political boundaries visible from space, no national borders that seemed significant against the backdrop of infinite emptiness. The atmosphere appeared as a thin, vulnerable shell protecting all life from the hostile environment of space, while the continents and oceans formed a single, integrated system that clearly shared a common destiny. Space exploration revealed other worlds in our solar system, each with unique characteristics that illuminated Earth's special qualities as a haven for complex life. Mars showed evidence of ancient water flows, but had lost its atmosphere to space. Venus demonstrated the consequences of runaway greenhouse effects, while the moons of Jupiter and Saturn displayed the diverse outcomes possible under different conditions of temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. Robotic probes visited planets, moons, and asteroids, gathering data about the formation and evolution of our solar system, while searching for signs of life beyond Earth. These mechanical explorers extended human senses across distances that would require decades or centuries of travel for human crews, revealing the diversity and complexity of planetary environments throughout the solar system. Radio telescopes detected signals from distant galaxies, revealing the vast scale of the universe and our position within cosmic structures spanning billions of light years. These observations showed that our solar system occupied a tiny corner of a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of stars, while that galaxy was itself just one among hundreds of billions of similar structures distributed throughout observable space. The space age demonstrated that human intelligence and technology could transcend planetary boundaries, suggesting that our species might eventually spread life and consciousness throughout the galaxy, while continuing to explore the fundamental questions about existence that have driven scientific inquiry since its beginning. Our cosmic journey has carried us from the first whisper of creation through stellar birth, planetary formation, and the emergence of consciousness itself, a story spanning 14 billion years that brings us to this moment when human minds can contemplate their own origins. Yet to complete this circle of understanding, we must return to a specific chapter in Earth's history that holds the key to why we exist at all, breathing the very air that ancient forests bequeathed to our modern world. The spacefaring humans who now view Earth from orbit and probe cosmic mysteries with technology owe their existence to an atmospheric experiment so dramatic it created conditions unlike anything before or since in planetary history. The oxygen filling our lungs, the fossil fuels that built our civilization, and the climate stability that enabled everything from agriculture to space exploration all trace back to one extraordinary period when Earth became a living laboratory for biological innovation. 300 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, our planet was conducting the most extreme atmospheric transformation in its history. This wasn't simply the era of coal forest we glimpsed earlier. It was a global biological revolution that fundamentally rewrote the rules of what life could achieve on a terrestrial world. The vast coal forests covering much of the planet were producing oxygen through photosynthesis at such unprecedented rates that atmospheric levels soared to concentrations that would overwhelm most modern organisms. Atmospheric oxygen reached 35% of the total atmosphere, nearly double today's life-sustaining 21%, creating an aerial environment so rich it fundamentally altered the physics of terrestrial existence. This oxygen-saturated world enabled biological achievements that pushed the absolute limits of what was physically possible for air-breathing life. Insects, which depend on passive gas diffusion through their body systems, could grow to sizes that defy modern imagination because the dense oxygen supported metabolic demands impossible under current conditions. Dragonflies with wingspans stretching 2 feet across dominated ancient skies like aerial giants, while millipedes longer than humans navigated forest floors where oxygen concentrations approached the theoretical maximum for complex life. These creatures represented the ultimate expression of what arthropod body plans could achieve when freed from the respiratory constraints that limit modern insects. Yet this oxygen-drunk world harbored dangers that reveal how precarious the balance of planetary conditions truly is. The hyperoxic atmosphere made fires burn with explosive ferocity that could consume entire continental forests in conflagrations of almost volcanic intensity. Lightning strikes triggered blazes that roared through landscapes with the force of controlled detonations, creating an environment where combustion operated by entirely different rules. The same atmospheric conditions that enabled biological gigantism also destabilized global climate through complex feedback loops between vegetation, atmospheric chemistry, and planetary temperature regulation. Greenhouse gases from volcanic activity and decomposing plant matter created wild climate swings that would ultimately trigger ice ages and mass extinctions, demonstrating that even beneficial changes can push planetary systems beyond stable limits. The burial of organic matter from these great forests in ancient swamps created the coal deposits that would eventually power human civilization, preserving solar energy captured by Carboniferous photosynthesis for release hundreds of millions of years later. When humans learned to burn coal, they were literally igniting compressed ancient sunlight, using fossilized forests to build the industrial foundation for space exploration. The atmospheric changes initiated during this period established carbon cycles and climate patterns that continue governing Earth's environmental systems today. The same biological processes that filled the atmosphere with life-giving oxygen also created the planetary regulatory mechanisms that maintain conditions suitable for complex life. Understanding this ancient transformation reveals life's profound power to reshape entire worlds, showing that the breathable atmosphere enabling human existence resulted not from inevitable planetary development, but from billions of years of biological innovation that turned a sterile world into a cradle for consciousness. Every breath connects us to those ancient oxygen-producing forests, while every achievement of human civilization, from agriculture to space exploration, builds upon the atmospheric foundation established when Earth was learning to balance life and climate in an experiment that made our existence possible.